I saved an injured alien girl. Then the alien queen called me her family's hero. The girl was already dying when I found her. She was half buried in the snow, wedged between two boulders at the bottom of a crater that had not existed 30 minutes ago. I had heard the impact from my camp, a sound like the sky cracking in half, and I had grabbed my pack and run toward it before I even had a reason to. Old habit. When something breaks, you move toward it. That is what my instructor at Fort Bragg told me on my first day of combat medic training, and it was the only thing I never forgot. The crater was maybe 40 feet wide, edges still warm. The snow around it melted into a dark, wet ring. The debris inside was unlike anything I had ever seen. Thin, crystalline panels, not metal, not glass, something between the two, scattered across the ground like broken mirror pieces. No fire, no smoke, just silence and cold, and the faint blue glow coming from the fissure between the rocks. I climbed down without thinking and found her. She was small, maybe the size of a 12-year-old child, though I already knew she was not a child in any human sense. Her skin was pale and semi-translucent, and beneath it I could see a network of veins that pulsed with dim, violet-colored light. She had 4 limbs, 2 of which were folded beneath her at angles that made my stomach tighten. Her face was narrow, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and doubled, 2 separate rhythms, slightly out of sync, like 2 people breathing in the same body. She was bleeding from a deep wound along her left side. The fluid was blue, iridescent, and it was spreading fast across the snow. I dropped to my knees and opened my trauma kit. I want to be clear about something. I had never seen a creature like her before. No one had. I did not know her biology, her blood type, her atmospheric requirements, or whether anything in my kit would help or hurt her. What I knew was this: she was losing circulatory fluid faster than her body could manage. Her breathing was labored, and her body temperature was dropping in a mountain environment that was currently sitting at -14 degrees. The specifics were alien. The problem was not. I pressed a stack of hemostatic gauze against the wound and held it firm. She did not move. I checked her airway, clear, and positioned her head carefully to keep both breathing rhythms as open as I could. One of her broken limbs was secondary, non-dominant based on its structure, and I used my SAM splint to immobilize it against her torso. Her bones were denser than I expected. The splint barely closed around the limb, but it held. The bleeding was the problem. The gauze was soaking through faster than it should have. I pulled out my quick clot pack and hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, the longest I allowed myself, then applied it to the wound. It reacted immediately. Not the way it reacts on human tissue, but it reacted. The clotting agent began to foam at the edges of the wound, expanding slightly, and I almost pulled it back before I noticed that the foam was hardening, sealing. Her biology was taking the chemical and doing something with it that human tissue never could. Within 2 minutes, the bleeding had slowed to almost nothing. I exhaled for what felt like the first time since I had climbed into the crater. She opened her eyes. They were amber, large, and filled with a kind of terror that needed no translation. She made a sound, not a scream, more like a sharp, resonant tone, 2 frequencies at once, and she tried to pull away from me. I kept one hand steady on the wound seal and raised the other, palm out, and I spoke to her the way I had spoken to wounded soldiers in places I do not like to remember. Low, calm, direct. You are okay. I have you. Stay still. She did not understand my words. That much was obvious, but she went still. Not because she trusted me yet, she did not, but because something in the tone reached her. I have seen it before in people who have lost too much blood. The body starts listening to the steadiest voice nearby. It is not a decision. It is just survival, finding a signal in the noise. I built a shelter around us, using my emergency tarp and the natural windbreak of the boulders. I layered my sleeping bag over her. I sat with my back against the rock and monitored her breathing intervals through the night, counting, noting, adjusting her position twice when the secondary rhythm started to stutter. By the time the sky began to lighten, her veins had shifted color. The dim, sickly violet had warmed to a faint gold. I did not know what that meant, but it looked like something getting better. At roughly 8 in the morning, 6 hours after she had regained consciousness and begun watching me with those wide amber eyes, the mountain went quiet, in a way that mountains simply do not go quiet. No wind, no birds, nothing. The silence pressed down like a physical weight. Then the trees about half a mile east bent sideways all at once, and something enormous descended through the cloud cover. It was a ship, not anything that resembled the ships in films or books. No sleek chrome, no blinking lights. It was dark and asymmetrical, like a structure grown rather than built, and it moved with a precision that made it more frightening than if it had been loud and clumsy. It found the only clearing large enough to land in and settled there without a sound. 6 figures emerged and moved through the snow toward the crater. They moved fast. They were built like her, 4-limbed bioluminescent veins visible at the neck and wrists, but taller, armored in layered material that caught no light at all. The one in front had a weapon I could not identify raised and forward before they had even reached the crater's edge. I did not move. I had nothing to move with. My rifle was back at my base camp 2 days from here. All I had was my folding knife clipped to my belt, and the fact that I was sitting cross-legged in the snow with their girl asleep against my shoulder, her breathing even, her veins glowing gold. The lead soldier dropped into the crater. His weapon came up. I looked at him and did not look away. Then she woke up. She looked at the soldier. She looked at me. Then she turned back to the soldier and said something in a language that had no sound I could reproduce. Tonal, complex, layered. The weapons came down. All of them. The lead soldier stared at me for a long moment, then put one fist briefly against his chest and inclined his head. I found out 3 days later what she had said to him. She had said, "He held my blood in." They treated me well on the ship, better than I expected. I was given a warm room, food that was edible if unusual, and a great deal of respectful space. The girl, whose name, rendered in the closest approximation my mouth could manage, was Lyra, was taken to medical care immediately. Through the small window in my room, I could see stars I did not recognize. On the second day, a translator drone arrived. It floated at eye level, about the size of a volleyball, and it spoke to me in English, that was accented but clear. "You are being taken to the Sovereign," it told me. "Who is the Sovereign?" I asked. "The one who decides," it said, and offered nothing more. The flagship was 3 times the size of the ship that had retrieved us, and it was already in orbit when we docked. I was escorted through corridors that hummed faintly, past Veilthari, I had learned their name by then, who stopped and looked at me with expressions I could not read. Not hostile, something closer to careful. The throne room was not a room. It was an open hall with a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness, the floor a deep black material that reflected light like still water. The court was full. Hundreds of Veilthari lined the walls, their veins glowing every color I had seen, and several I had not. At the far end of the hall, a figure stood that made every other person in the room look small. The sovereign Veithra was taller than any of her soldiers, ancient in a way that was visible not in weakness but in absolute, overwhelming stillness. Her veins ran gold-white, the brightest I had seen, steady as starlight. She wore nothing ceremonial. She did not need to. I walked toward her and stopped at a respectful distance. The translator drone hovered at my shoulder. She studied me for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried through the entire hall without effort. "You are the one who held Lyra's life inside her body." "I am a medic," I said. "It is what I do." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something, and the translator rendered it carefully. "My daughter's vessel sent no distress signal. Our recovery systems calculated her survival probability at 4%. The probability was based on the environment, the severity of her injuries, and the absence of any known capable party within range." "The math forgot about me," I said. Something shifted in her expression. I would not call it a smile, but it was something. "We have been deliberating," she said, "for 11 of your months, about your species. You stand in the path of a corridor we intend to use. There were 2 positions in our council. The first held that your kind should be moved, your civilization relocated to make room. The second held that your kind should be engaged, recognized, brought into a wider understanding." The hall was completely silent. "The vote was equal," she said. "It has been equal for 11 months. I did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. My daughter crashed during an observation flight over your northern mountain range, she continued. A mechanical failure. Our probability systems declared her non-recoverable within minutes of impact. And then a human being climbed into the wreckage and spent the night keeping her alive with tools designed for his own biology. She stood. The translator drone made a sound, barely audible, that I later learned was the equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. Standing, apparently, was not something the sovereign did for petitioners. The court seemed to hold itself very still. In our oldest language, she said, walking toward me with a deliberateness that made the distance between us feel both very long and very short, there is a word, Veathari. It means one who holds life for another without being asked. We named ourselves for that word 10,000 years ago because we believed it was our species' highest calling. We built our civilization around it. She stopped in front of me. She was nearly 3 times my height. Her gold-white veins pulsed slowly. In 11 months of debate, she said quietly, no one in my council thought to check whether your species already understood this. She lowered one 4-fingered hand and placed it gently on top of my head. The translator whispered in my ear that this gesture was used only for blood family. I name you Veathari, she said. I name you my family's hero, and I name your species known, not to be relocated, not to be observed from a distance, but known, engaged, recognized. The hall erupted in sound. I do not have a word for what Veathari approval sounds like. It is felt more than heard, a resonance that moves through the floor and into the chest. I stood there and let it wash over me, and tried very hard not to look as overwhelmed as I felt. Lyra was brought in then. She was walking, slowly, one limb still supported by a brace, and her veins burned bright gold when she saw me. She crossed the floor and stopped in front of me, and looked up with those amber eyes, and said something to the translator. She says, the drone rendered carefully, that in your language, the closest word she has learned for what you did is staying. She says most beings calculate whether to help. You did not calculate. You stayed. I looked at her, and she looked at me, and there was nothing to say that was big enough, so I just nodded. She nodded back, straight-backed, serious, very much her mother's daughter. 6 weeks later, I was back in my kitchen in rural Alberta, with a mug of coffee and 17 completed government debriefings behind me, and the morning news running on my laptop showing live footage of the Veathari diplomatic vessel sitting in stable Earth orbit, waiting politely for a formal invitation to land. The footage was grainy because all footage of them was grainy. Their ships did something to cameras at a distance. Up close, apparently, they photographed fine. I knew this because I had been up close, which was why 17 separate agencies with 17 separate sets of questions had spent 6 weeks sitting across tables from me, asking me to describe in exact detail what a 3-meter alien queen had looked like when she named me family. I kept telling them the same thing. She looked like someone who meant it. A message came through the diplomatic channel that afternoon. It was translated, careful, and clearly written by someone who had only recently learned English and was proud of how far they had come. It read, I have been studying your language every day since we parted. My teacher says I am advancing quickly. I wanted to tell you that I have decided to study your medicine, specifically your improvised field medicine. My tutors say there is no formal academic program for this, and I will have to construct my own curriculum. I told them that is fine. I am good at improvising. I learned this from someone. Then she wrote, in our culture, the one who holds your life when it is close to leaving is considered the same as family. I want you to know, I understand this is different in your culture, but I want you also to know that in my culture, I now have an uncle. I hope this is acceptable. She signed it. Your niece, Lyra. I sat there for a while with the coffee going cold. Then I looked at my trauma kit on the counter. It is not a special kit. It is a black nylon pouch, 12 years old, with a worn zipper and a crack along the bottom corner I keep meaning to fix. It holds hemostatic gauze, a tourniquet, compression bandages, a SAM splint, a pair of trauma shears, and a small foil emergency blanket. I have used it on a hunter who cut himself with a chainsaw 3 miles from the nearest road. I used it on a teenager who broke his leg on a trail and sat in the rain for 4 hours before I found him. I used it on a stranger who went through a guardrail on Highway 40 and was conscious and asking me if he was going to be okay when I reached him through his shattered window. I had not packed it that morning because I thought I would need it. I packed it because I always pack it. The morning I climbed down into that crater and found Lyra bleeding into the snow, I did not feel brave. I did not feel historic. I felt exactly the way I always feel when something breaks and I move toward it. Focused, a little cold, running through the checklist in my head. Airway, breathing, circulation. Treat the patient in front of you. Stay until someone takes over, or until the patient no longer needs you. The most important thing humanity ever put into space was not a rocket or a radio signal or a declaration written by committees of important people in important rooms. It was 12 years of packing the bag right, and the decision not to walk away. That is all it was. That is everything it was.